Over our multiple episodes, we've had some incredible guests. And one of the things that I like is when someone has written something that when I've gone through it, um, it's just, okay, people need to get this book. So our our guest today did not come on the show to get his book promoted. I know that. We had a great pre-call, and the book was almost parenthetical. But he sent me a copy of it to go through. And I went through it, and folks, you got to get this book. It's called Getting the Job Done, and the author is Kevin Torf. He's CEO of T2, and it's just this 174 pages of items you can use as soon as you put the book down. It is really good. And Kevin, welcome to the show. It's such an honor to have you with us today.
Carl, thanks for allowing me to be part of your group and your podcast. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk with you.
So the very first episode I did, Kevin, I was all prepared and I gave my very first guest was my very first boss, and I've stayed in contact with him for over 30 years. And at the end of his bio, Jay said, Carl, that bio sounded more like a eulogy. In the future, just let people explain themselves. So just give us a couple of minutes of your career path, what led you to write the book, what you do, and then we'll kick into picking your brain on your expertise.
Well, I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I was fortunate enough to have a father that taught me electronics at an early age and just took to the engineering field of study and got engaged with different companies that were at the beginning of the computer era as we know it today, and involved my understanding of technology. Came to the United States 30 years ago, was fortunate enough to start my own business in different capacities, doing consulting, helping in the telecommunication field, engaging in software development. And eventually this led to a client of mine actually asking me to come help him start a consulting engagement in healthcare. And that goes back now 20 years ago. I took on the project. It was a large scale project. It was helping them build a new hospital facility. And I just got taken in by healthcare, the complexities, the challenges. It was just not an industry that I understood well back then, and decided this was something I wanted to do more of. And the T2 group evolved through that passion. And today, I'm fortunate enough to be the CEO of the company and really focusing on providing a difference in healthcare.
And I just want to tell our audience that you've heard what he just said, but when he talks about projects in healthcare, if I understand, if I remember correctly, Kevin, um, right now you're loading an entire hospital's database to the cloud. Is that correct when we talked?
Correct. Well, it's all their applications. You know, healthcare today has a legacy slew of applications to keep the day-to-day operations running. Some healthcare systems have, providers I'm talking about when I say healthcare systems. These are typically hospitals, might have 400 different applications, and every one of them retains data in one form or another, whether it's managing hospital beds, managing lab testing that goes on, financials, collections of payment. We think of the medical record as what the entire is made up of the entire system. That's just one of the 400 applications. And every one of these, when being transferred over, has their challenges that go with it. Some of these vendors are newer, some are older, and it's being able to navigate through these efforts and do it in a way that doesn't impact the hospital. The hospital's got to do these projects without any disruption to its patients, physicians, in order to be able to fill their responsibilities daily.
So I remember I was working on a project in a hospital up in Washington, and we were having a meeting. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I knew one of the orthopedic surgeons really well. And this guy was a can-do former football player, former team doctor for a major football team, NFL back east before he came west. Great, great guy. And he comes dragging into the office or into the boardroom and sits down, slumps down, runs his hands through his hair. And I said, Doctor, what's going on? He said, Oh, we just went live with X today. I won't say who X was. And he said, I had to cancel half my surgeries. It's not working right. Um, and that situation has been duplicated, I don't know how many times, um, in my career. How do you help individual providers and hospitals make the right decisions so that surgeons, physicians aren't blown out of the water? I know that, starting in with an EMR is tough, but how do you help them so that something like that doesn't happen? Maybe low.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. I wish there was. And, as you said, it's daunting, for the physicians, nurses to all of a sudden change their daily habits, uh, and engage in a new platform, because usually that's what a migration or a new implementation entails, and be able to be immediately productive. It's like anything in life. It takes time to learn how to do anything. Just like when you get a new application or Microsoft updates Word, and all of a sudden one of your buttons is now moved to a different location. Now you imagine that being a
Oh, yeah.
physician and you're in the thick of it, and you've got a patient that needs help, and you've got to go to the medical record system, and all of a sudden what you used to isn't in the same place anymore. So all the training in the world really can't, cover every corner and give you everything you need, but it helps. And you need to go through that process, and that takes time, and it's an investment, and it's a commitment, because theoretically these efforts and initiatives uh, need to be planned out, and you need to be able to give it time, and physicians generally don't have a lot of that. So you got to be able to be really efficient in how you introduce these new tools, these new workflows, and help them through the process.
So when you're working with this hospital to either install an Oracle or an Epic, how many people are you running? How many are
Well, usually our firm likes to empower the hospitals themselves to do a lot of the work themselves. So we're very different. We're a different consulting firm from many others who wants to bring in a whole team and do it for the hospital. Our method is to utilize their current staff, train their staff in how to execute on these projects, give them guidance and leadership in how to be successful. So yes, there could be over 100, 200 people involved in these projects in different capacities.
So that jumps us perfect segue of where I want to head for the next little while. Uh, as I mentioned, a lot of our listeners are new or mid-level leaders that will one day be in your slot of running the place, but right now they're learning. Healthcare is not the best at training people for leadership. They're superb at helping them at the bedside. But boy, when it comes to actually having Nurse Dave or Nurse Jane, they're a BSN. They may even be MSN. They've been bedside for a couple of years. They're doing super work, and suddenly they're asked to be a nurse manager or a charge nurse. Um, Working with a situation right now where There's an anesthesiologist who was just asked to be in charge of a committee, a big committee involving a lot of hospital personnel with absolutely no training on how to be a leader. So when you and I talked, I wrote down some questions. You talked about a Montessori approach when it came to leading a team. Could you, most of us know Montessori because we went through it as kids or we've had children in a Montessori school. Could, and that fascinated me what you said. Could you elaborate on that?
I look at, when you form a team, there's always going to be differences of experience, differences of skills. And in order for a team to function well together, the team needs to learn how to respect each other and learn from each other to really evolve. And Montessori, you know, really talks about this at a young age. And what Montessori did in the structure of how they school is they put 3 years of three age groups together with 3 years apart. And the intention was that the younger kids will learn from the older kids. Older kids will learn from teaching the younger kids. The middle group will learn from the younger and older kids, and they share that experience together and they evolve together. In business and in executing projects in healthcare, we tend to be impatient. We don't tend to want to help each other. We by nature have this belief that we can just do it better ourselves and quicker. Well, that doesn't allow us to grow and it doesn't allow us to learn. So I do look at the two and I compare them together. And I do believe the best functioning teams are when individuals work with each other in that manner and allow themselves to grow through that, will allow them to get to the point where they become very, very productive.
So imagine that you're in a smaller room. There's maybe a team of 10 or 15 charge nurses that are truly in leadership for the first time. I mean, many of them just out of school, nursing school, 5 years, um, de dealing with a physician that um, is in leadership, and he's only been out of fellowship 3 years. How how do you help them deal with strong egos? I remember the wife of one surgeon I worked with said, Carl, I guess I could summarize him by saying many times wrong, but never in doubt.
No, it's at all levels. It's not just the physicians and, it's just even the software developer, the administrator, the person that's running finance. I think when you allow them to come together collectively and you can let them get the unity that they're making a commitment together and they all need to be accountable to each other in order to be successful, that there's an obligation to work in that manner. It's like I think I mentioned to you, sport teams. It's how do they really evolve and how do they do very well and excel. It's when they really understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, but they accommodate for that and they build a unity together. That takes patience. It takes listening. And then it takes really practicing it on a regular basis until you can build that level of confidence in each other, and ultimately you will prevail.
So I'm going to describe a scenario. I can't imagine it's going to be unique just to me, and teach our audience about how you would deal with this. You have a setting, brilliant people, higher in their career accomplishments, um, hundreds of years of experience between them. And because of a variety of issues, excuse me, um, they have silos. And I can go around the room because I was just in this room the other day, and there's about 10 very significant and successful silos. I mean, no one is failing in their role, but there's there is just no connection between them. How do you step in, and what can you teach us about leading in a situation where you're coming in multiple successful individual entities, but they're not maximizing because they're not helping each other? And they're to some degree fighting for turf and resources. So, what would you teach us there? What would you do?
Over the years, I've learned that if you to engage with everybody in the room, you want to get them to come along with your ultimate goal and objective, and that's to allow them to really be collaborative. So I believe you got to reach out to them and ask them what they would do and how they would do it. You unfortunately need to keep that time based because people can go off on tangents as well. So you need to have some direction. But if you can allow people to give you their thoughts and opinions and let everybody hear everybody else's thoughts and opinions, hopefully you can get a dialogue going and let people start understanding each other's different perspectives. And you've got to break that barrier down of people having to believing that they know better. They also got to understand that a team will allow them to accomplish more than
Mhm.
if they did it individually. And that takes a lot to get past. But once the team starts really forming and then storming, it's part of Tuckman's theory.
Yes.
They really can ultimately get to performing. But you got to break those silos down, and the way to do it, I believe, is through what I call a pull philosophy versus a push philosophy. Don't tell them what to do. Ask them what they can do and how they would do it, and let them interact.
Mhm. Excellent. So, a little bit more on that. What I run into a lot is leadership teams where someone is promoted into the leadership circle, and for some reason of, corporate logistics, they now have people that are older than them and certainly more years under the belt than them, and they're having to be the younger is leading the older. Maybe senior leadership said that, John at his stage was probably not going to progress, but Jill is just a dynamo and we see a good future for her. So, a couple of questions, and weave them in as you want to on the answers. How should senior leadership set this up for success? How should John, the guy who didn't get the call, respond to Jill, who everyone knows is just on a vertical climb to the top, but is a good person, isn't, strong ego, good person? Boy, it's just a hornet's nest. What would you consult around that?
Well, you got to get the egos out the room. It's like the island, you got to work together to survive. I think the first thing is for everybody to understand that unless they work together, they won't ultimately survive or achieve the success they need. In doing that, people start changing their approach as they start trying to position themselves.
Mhm.
Uh, when they also realize that when we work on these projects, it's all about a team working on these projects. And people think of a team. Oh, I've got my forwards, my backs, my receivers. But yeah, they all got different skills, and they all coming together now, and they all play a role. And the sooner they realize that, the sooner that who's going up the corporate ladder and who's going to get a raise come gets a little bit taken out of it. Uh, And the only way that can happen is when the team starts seeing success, and when they really start seeing their own fruits come together, will they really stop thinking about those thoughts and really get engaged in the work at hand. So it takes an effort. That person that's being given that responsibility now to take that leadership, they got to lead. Being a leader is not about policing. It's not about enforcing. It's not about telling people what to do. It's like a coach. A coach has got to get the best out of everybody. And many a times there are people on the team that have vastly more experience. With the people I work with, definitely the case. I've got some very well educated people that, my job is to find where they can bring value. And as I said, pull them along versus push them.
So, staying with this little example here, you're the CEO, you see Jill's talents that, you're wanting to keep her high talent will be superb for your organization. And me, John, who knows that I've been passed over and at my age, probably not going to really have a lot more opportunities for high growth. So I want to keep my job. It's important. I need employment. So you start noticing that I'm not passive aggressive on the surface. I nod in the meetings. I say Jill's marvelous. But you just notice that I am subtly undermining Jill. I'll make a comment here, or I just won't follow through. So maybe she looks a little that she didn't do her job when it really was me, because I'm pretty ticked off about this. As CEO, because we're talking to people who will be CEOs, and there's some listeners that are in that position. I've seen it done wrong. Tell us how to do it right, of how to pull Carl or John aside and get him in the right direction. What would you do?
I'm going to come down to, I like having analogies and doing comparisons. And the best I could have is the big event that took place on the weekend, the Eagles in Kansas.
Ouch!
When you, Al, you're right, Al. Now, how did the Eagles pull this off, and how did they do it? They worked together. There was no one dominant player in the field. Uh, unfortunately going to say that wasn't the same for Kansas. There was one player on the field, Mahone, and he was expected to do it all. Well, it doesn't work that way. And he didn't have the best game he could have, and everybody around him then suffered because of that, and they didn't have the best game.
We're
Where the
getting.
Eagles just worked as a unity.
Yep. So well said. Um, yep. Oh boy, we could spend the rest of the time just taking that one apart as a leadership lesson. So, how do you get Carl back on the boat, or John in this case, back on the boat, or help him see that maybe the boat isn't for him anymore? What do you do?
When the team works together, and when they do collaborate, it's going to be very evident very quickly when a individual is not keeping, to their position. And I'm going to go back to this is sport, the NFL. You're supposed to be down the field, you're supposed to be in this quadrant, but if you think better, you're not going to be there, and you're going to miss a few interceptions, and then the balls are not going to be coming to you anymore. And basically, the rest of the team will notice it, and you'll start getting excluded. And which isn't ideal. That itself has its own problems. And with hopefully you'll start realizing you're better working together. And when you do work together, you will be successful and you will grow, because you all grow this way. And but it does take sometimes, these challenges and how to get through them. And yeah, no, sometimes people do need to be voted off the island. You just got to say this isn't working. But everybody deserves an opportunity, and if the team can unite, uh, it can resolve a lot of these issues.
Excellent. I want to jump to completely different topic. Um, Problem solving and decision making, I don't think are well taught skills. We assume people have them. They're obvious, obviously in quotation marks. If Carl is at this level with an education and experience, he must know how to do X well. And it turns out that's not the case at all. He's clueless about how to really go through a problem solving process. Um, and I'd like you to take it apart for us a bit. Um, if Carl is given X, Carl, we need you to do this. And Carl, of course, is delighted with the opportunity, but he goes home and tells his wife that, honey, I've been given this great opportunity. I don't even know where to start because they assumed I knew and I didn't want to tell them they were wrong. So talk to me as if I am Carl, but talk to me as if I have just received that and you're my mentor. I go to you and say, Kevin, big job, deadline 1st of March. That gives us about 2.5 weeks. How do I even start to figure out what to do, much less get it done?
Well, the first thing to do is not to panic. If you got to be able to break everything down instead of trying to think of ultimately what you need to do and all the things that need to happen, you need to think about what can I do today? What can I do this week? You got to break it down into palatable items that you can comprehend and you can ultimately do. Uh, what's going to get in your way is you're worried more about tomorrow and next month versus what you need to do today. So if you can break it down that way, go ahead.
But how do I even um I love the book by McKinsey Consultants, Bulletproof Problem Solving, because it gives a framework. Um, but what are some basic skills that Carl, the I don't know what I'm doing person, can can use so I don't panic? Because I'm looking at 2.5 weeks. I'm looking at Mount Everest, and what's not to panic about? How do I break it down?
You know, I call it just getting started. It's like I think I might have mentioned this to you. If you get dropped into the middle of the ocean, which direction are you going to swim in? And you can be cold and you can worry about where land is and will you make it, and how far do you have to go and which way is the winds blowing, and you're probably going to stay in one place and you're going to drown. Or you can just say start, whether it's right or whether it's wrong. Even if you've got such a short time frame, it's still not that relevant.
Mhm.
Just start swimming and have the strength to reflect on what you're doing. And as you evolve, you will learn and you will adjust. And you'll start finding a momentum that will happen with it by itself. And will you get to where you need to be? You've got to have a little bit of faith that you are capable of doing things. You can get there. Uh, but if you're so focused and worried about where you need to be at the very end, you'll never get there unless you start.
Mhm. You said a great phrase that I wrote down. I loved it. Procrastination due to overthinking. Uh, I saw a t-shirt the other day that said, please give me a second while I overthink this. Uh, so talk to us about overthinking because we don't want to lose anything. We don't want to miss anything. We don't want to seem uninformed. And what we're doing, going back to your last analogy, is I'm starting to sink and I'm not playing with words here, trying to rhyme them. I'm starting to sink just because I think that I'm thinking, and thinking is sufficient. Talk to us about that simplicity of just getting started
You know,
thinking.
everything needs planning,
Mhm.
but the question is to what extent you need to plan. And Agile's taught us that you just need to plan enough. And what is that enough? in your case, it might be, all right, what do I need to do this week in order to get going? Agile really tries to coach us in that. Try not think out of that. Try not think beyond that, and just plan enough, which might be a day's worth of planning if you want to equate it to time, and stop then worrying about the future. Go out and execute on what you need to do with that day's worth of planning, which might be, a week's worth of productivity. Uh, and then stop and then reflect and ask yourself, are you going in the right direction? It's the swimmer. Are you heading in the right way? Is this working? What did you learn from what you did? And replan and rethink what you need to do the upcoming week, and then repeat this cycle and build a cadence. And as you build that cadence, you'll build confidence and you'll start seeing your results, and success changes everything. It really does. You start engaging and you start building your own future here.
The author John Maxwell, in his book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, talks about big Mo, meaning momentum. And once you get that momentum moving, so much changes.
Again, it's an athlete training. These athletes aren't successful because they just went into the game. Even the really talented ones, they have to work at it. They have to practice. They have to learn their role. They have to learn their strategies, and they learn it little bits at a time. And hopefully, if they coach well, again, the word coaching comes in here, they excel and they become leaders and they become the greatest athletes. But it takes that little bit of incremental growing.
I want to go back to what you were talking about. You'd have to live in a cave for the last 50 years not to have heard the word agile. You talked a bit in our pre-call about the Agile Manifesto. Can you dig into that a little bit for our listeners?
So some 20, 30 years ago, it started with a lot of the software development companies as they were pioneering software, weren't doing it as well as they could have. If you go back to your earlier years of using a computer, you might remember some of those frustrations. And the challenge is that they all wanted to have an end result, and they were developing with exactly what we're talking about, with what is the end game. And then they started over planning, because they said, well, the more we plan, the better we'll be prepared. But the world changed so quickly that by the time they started doing anything, what they had planned was already out of date and it wasn't evolving with what they needed to do. So they broke this up, Agile, in the framework that I just discussed, where you could do things in an iterative way and evolve them. The Agile Manifesto was written by several of these architects that put down the framework of how to build teams, how to empower teams, how to do things in this iterative manner where you can be successful in its own right. They called it back then, it doesn't really apply today, shippable code. And the reason they called it shippable code, if you remember back when software started, you had these CDs and you had these boxes. And the thought was that once it got into the box and it was shippable, you couldn't get it back. And you couldn't go, it wasn't like you do today where you get these updates, through the cloud. So before you shipped it, it needed to be ready. But if you were looking at this ultimate goal, it would never happen. So you wanted to do things in such a modular way that things can stand alone by itself. And again, it was built around a software framework. So if the very first thing you do on your screen is I want to log in and put your credentials, develop that code. If that's all it does, finish it, get it done, ship it. I mean, that's the goal was that you could log in. It didn't say what you can do after you've logged in, and then evolve this in these incremental pieces as you ultimately build out your overall desire. That's now obviously evolved and changed as agile, has, and it's now become a way of thinking. It's also become a way of life. So I believe it's a way of problem solving, and it's grown much, much more than what it was originally, authored and pioneered to be.
Excellent. So I want to take just a moment here and introduce. First of all, we talked about this before it went live. Are you willing to come back for a second episode?
Absolutely, I love the subject, Carl. I
Okay.
love it. It's a great topic.
So if you've ever if you've ever seen a TV show where they just lead you up to where you want to know what happened, and then they say, stay tuned for our next episode. So we're going to do that a little to you here today, our listeners. As I mentioned at the outset, Getting the Job Done by Kevin Torf is a must read. I went through it this morning. It's that easy a book to go through and pick out things that you can walk away with tomorrow. And it's built around the word projects. And Kevin has broken out each of the letters to spell out a specific word, and then he elaborates on that. And in our next episode, I can't even count right now, probably easily 25 to 30 questions about each of these letters. So take us through, just as an intro for part two. Kevin, take us through each letter of the word projects and give us a bit of insight as to why you chose these words to get our listeners set up for our next episode.
Well, to start, very much like our conversation has gone through the last half an hour. I didn't have this word before I started. I didn't know where the land was and where I needed to swim. What I did was I had a collection of components that make up planning, projects, I should say. And, planning was one. Like we discussed, reflection was another. Being organized and having structure, empowering people. So I started, moving forward with putting my thoughts down about how each one of these different uh, components could make up how projects are executed. And I realized that if I sorted them by the word projects and started saying, well, what starts with P? Well, that was an easy one, planning. And then I said, all right, well, what comes next? Well, reflection. Well, those are two very instrumental words, and they play a major role. We plan, we execute, we reflect. Then I went through the O, which was being organized. You still need structure. Although agile, allows you to adapt and evolve, you need governance and you need process. Uh, and then my favorite one is next. It's the J for juggling. We all think we can do 100 things at once. Well, it's just not practical. It's not possible. And you'll never do anything as well as you could do if you were just doing one thing at a time, despite what people think. So there's a lot related to how you juggle. And then empower, which is E. And this is really about how to get the team to work together, like the stories we were talking about. Making people feel they belong, that they can contribute. And in order to do that, you need to empower them. Uh, Next is communications. How to communicate and work with each other. There's a dialect, there's a style, there's a nature to not talk down to people, to be collaborative in how you talk, to share, so you can come to an ultimate goal and objective. Next is T, how to work as a team, how to be effective together. and how to get used to each other, like the Montessori system. How do we adapt for the different skills and experience? And then ending off with the S for standards, developing and evolving into routines, finding the things that work, scaling them in a routine manner where you can adopt standards and set guidelines to ultimately bring these projects together. Uh, well, I don't know if I wish I could have thought of that before I started, because I don't think I would have got the results as I got afterwards. But it came together through actually practicing and doing stuff and reflecting and then changing the ordering of how I wanted to do it, the words, what they meant. And that's ultimately what brought me to write the book around the way I did.
So I want our listeners to reflect for a moment. Um, I know many of you, as you listen to this, are driving. Many of you are wondering if the treadmill will ever stop this morning as you're in mile whatever of a very long workout. I do want you to take some time, though, to go and get a copy of this book. Again, Kevin did not come on here wanting me to promote the book. I'm promoting it because I really believe that if you can look at these letters, again, I'm going to go through those, the planning, the reflection, the organization, the juggling, the empowering, the communication and engagement, the teamwork and standards. I'd really challenge you over the next couple of weeks, because the second episode will be in another couple of weeks, is to look at, because I don't want you to be put off by the simplicity of this approach. As you go through the book, you'll see just how robust this simplicity is. He writes tight, he writes well. Go through it and come back to the next episode with some questions of your own. And literally, if you want to shoot in some questions that I can ask Kevin, I'm Carl, Karl, at coachinggroupinc.com. Send me an email and we'll add your question to our list. I appreciate you being with us today, to our listeners. And Kevin, I cannot thank you enough. As you were talking, I thought, I love speaking with people that have a total command of their subject. Thanks for sharing your level of genius with us today.